All right. Good. So I thought I would start with a little bit of an overview of what type of tokens we will have according to MiCAR. Not sure if that had been a topic this morning already. Did you go through this already? No? Okay. So this is like the landscape that we see now. We have this very broad definition of crypto asset, which is basically anything that represents a value or a right and which can be stored and transferred electronically using DLT or similar, whatever that means, right? So it's very broad. And then within this very broad definition of crypto assets, we have certain specific types of crypto asset defined and given a specific regulatory framework. And that are these two dangerous tokens, the stable coins, right? The reason why we ultimately have this regulation, right? It goes back to the Libra DM project, the Facebook coin, so to speak, which everybody was scared of, which aimed to create a global stable coin backed by a basket of fiat currencies. And obviously, you know, the central banks across the globe did not like that idea at all. So that is basically the reason why we have now very strict rules for those stablecoin types of tokens. I will focus today more on that side, the so-called others, right? So MiCAR always talks about other token, but arts and EMTs. That's the rest of the bucket. And in that bucket is the utility token, how we legal people like to define it, and that is not a cryptocurrency, that is not Ether and Bitcoin, but only a token which is a voucher to be exchanged against a product or a service, right? But which is not intended to be used as a currency between all sorts of stakeholder groups, like Ether, for example. And for utility tokens concerning a product or a service which is already existing, so no pre-financing character of the utility token, only for those there is a lighter regulation provided for in MiCAR. All right, and then there are certain exemptions. So these, I try to visualize like bytes, right, which would generally fall into this very broad definition up here, but which are specifically exempt from MiCAR, are all types of MiFID financial instruments, existing e-money and fiats, some sorts of structured products, and then true NFTs. That had been a large debate. What is a true NFT and what is rather a collection or a series, and therefore not exempt but in the bucket. And then true DeFi, which only refers to everything that is fully decentralized, and we will have at 1 o'clock at the stage a panel discussion regarding DeFi projects and how they are captured under MiCAR. All right, so that was a brief reminder what we are talking about.
You're moving the back.
Oh, I'm moving the back?
I'll take care of the slides then.
Okay. Okay, I don't touch it anymore.
Yes. What would you like?
I think,
This one.
yeah, one up. Is there something in between? I don't think, okay. We had one. All right. Now, who is actually called by MiCAR? These are two types of persons, so to speak. One is the offerer, and the other ones are the service provider, right? I will only talk about the offerers today. An offerer is broader than like the issuer under the prospectus regulation, for example, because the legislators actually acknowledged that there is something like Bitcoin where you can find an issuer. So they thought, okay, we're clever, we are extending the scope, right? We are not only capturing issuers, but also all sorts of offerers. So anybody offering cryptos to the public, even though if they might not be the issuer. All right, let's move ahead. Good. So what are the requirements for token issuers? First of all, they must be a legal person, right? If you don't have a legal person, then you don't have an offerer. And other than crypto asset service providers, which need to be located within the EU, at least with a branch, there is no such requirement for offerors, right? So you can actually offer a token within the EU from outside the EU. So Swiss offerors, be relaxed. And the main requirement for those to offer tokens in the EU is the white paper requirement. The white paper requirement is basically copy and pasted from the prospectus regulation, except that, you know, it's not only concerning issuers, but a wider group of persons. But you see basically the same exemptions as we all know already from the prospectus regulation here, when it is offered to less than 150 persons per member state, so that's not even that little. If it is not more than 1 million in 12 months, or if it is restricted to be offered only to qualified investors. In those cases, you do not need to comply with the white paper requirement. However, you still need to comply with all the other requirements for issuers and offerors, and we'll come to that a bit later. On the other side, completely exempt from the offeror provisions in MiCAR are those cases. These are like crypto native exemptions, which do not had been copied from the prospectus regulation, but which are actually new, and that are offers free of charge. This is kind of limited. It's not the airdrop that you get when you like something or repost or share some personal data. That is not meant by free of charge. So free of charge also means that you're not supposed to ask for any data or any other action, right? But if it's completely free of charge, you're out of MiCAR. Then the stuff that is automatically mined as a reward for the maintenance of the DLT, that is basically Bitcoin and Ether that is newly created by the system for those nodes providers, right? So that is also out of scope of MiCAR. And then, as I mentioned, utility token for existing services and goods are out. And also these limited merchant networks, we know this exemption from the e-money directive. There is a similar one there, but that rarely applies in our cases. So those cases are completely out of the scope of Title II of MiCAR and not only exempt from the white paper requirements. All right, let's move ahead.
So regularly, I'll take care of the big screen.
Okay, these are the additional requirements, right? So if you fall only under the exemptions that stem from the prospectus regulation, the 150 investors per member state, or not more than 1 million within a year, then you're still caught by these obligations, although you don't need to write a white paper. And this is actually also very broad, right? Not only to act honestly, fairly, and professionally, okay, right? That's fine. But also to always communicate fair, clear, and not misleading with the token holder, to identify conflicts of interest, and then this is somewhat have been under discussion to act in the best interest of the token holders. That's a difficult one, right? So, I mean, you sell a token, and afterwards you're supposed to solely act in the interest of the token holders. That's kind of, you know, bringing yourself in a conflict of interest, and we will see how that provision will actually be applied. And then also treat token holders equally, unless disclosed in the white paper. That's also an interesting one, right? So you should not give larger investors preferential rights than, for example, smaller ones. So this will also, I think, lead to some kind of disclosures in the white paper. Yeah, and then this additional requirement that is cyber and information security. standards, which are still under development by ESMA in consultation with EBA and hopefully published by the end of this year. So we will only know by then what precisely will be required under those further obligations. All right. Now we come to one of my favorite topics because it doesn't seem to be discussed that much. And that is the personal liability of everybody in the management or administration boards of the token issuer. Hello? What did we invent limited liability companies for, right? So that was basically the idea that you're not personally liable unless you personally did something wrong, right? But this principle is actually turned upside down by MiCAR because that simply provides for this personal liability of everybody involved in the administrative, management, or supervisory body. So what are these persons liable for? Well, basically that the crypto asset white paper is complete, fair, clear, and not misleading. How many white papers did you read so far? Give me a rough number. 2? 5? All right, that's still quite little. How old were those? Were they recent or were they already a couple of years old? Last year? Okay, did you follow the projects of your 2 white papers?
I'm still diving into it.
You're still diving into it. And, you know, at least I feel that a lot of white papers get outdated very quickly, right? Because they typically describe a project which is aiming to build something in the future. And the future typically does not evolve how you had foreseen it, specifically not in a marketing instrument like a white paper, which tends to be a little bit exaggerating things. So I think this will be different under MiCAR, because that is super dangerous for your management people, right? So I actually currently see a lot of projects moving out of Europe due to this clause, right? So actually, I mean, who's supposed to bear personally the liability for the white paper to not be, you know, in any detail, not complete, not fair, not clear, and not misleading? That's really, I personally think it's really difficult to achieve, right? So what happens? Who are you liable for? That is any token holder, right? Any token holder who bought when the prices were high up can sue you when the price goes down. I'm pretty sure they will always find something in the white paper that they can claim had been misleading. So, yeah, I'm not sure if you know, that was actually a good idea for you know, creating a lively, liquid European crypto market. Yeah.
Nina?
Yeah.
Does it actually help when you move outside the EU and you want to offer your token in within
I'm coming
the EU?
to that later.
Okay, sorry.
All right, so what are the mitigation strategies that I have noticed so far? Well, the first is avoid the white paper obligation completely, right? If you don't need to have to write a white paper, then you know, you're not caught by that clause. Yeah, I mentioned the exemptions. Try to fit into one of these boxes. The next one is delaying the white paper obligation. What do I mean by that? I mean by that, you know, get your token out until the end of this year, get it listed, right? And then go silent, build your system, get your things done. The exchanges are only obliged to provide for a white paper for the tokens they list within the next 3 years, right? Until end 2027. So that gives you enough leeway, right, to actually build something and then write a white paper about something that is existing. That is way easier than to write a white paper about something that you still want to build, right? So that's what I mean with try to delay your white paper obligation. And then cautious. don't draw up a voluntary white paper. Why that? Because for voluntary white papers, all the white paper obligations hit, right? So if you do not need to create a white paper, don't put anything out and call it white paper, right? That would be insane. Just create a normal website and put the information there, but don't produce anything that looks close to a white paper. And there is another thing under discussion, which is using a vehicle which has no natural persons on its board. What is that? Any idea? We have one of those in Germany. GmbH and Co. KG, right? The GmbH and Co. KG is managed by the GmbH. So you could argue that the ones on the board are only limited company itself. I'm not 100% sure that this will hold up. From a German perspective, actually, I have a good feeling because not complying with these regulatory laws in Germany are criminal offenses. And criminal offenses need to be clearly defined by the law, right? You cannot broaden it by simply construing it in a different way. Unfortunately, that is not the case everywhere in Europe. So I wonder how we deal with that. But it's at least, one try that you could give it. Yeah, another one, very interesting, is bringing your token under MiFID as safe haven. Because this crazy rule does not exist under the prospectus regulation. So try to attach to your token kind of a security feature, some little profit participation, whatever, that makes you fall under MiFID. Because everything under MiFID is exempt from MiCAR, right? So, trying to hop under MiFID as a safe haven is actually one of those things that we're discussing a lot. What is the problem with this currently? Well, your investors presumably come more from the crypto side than from the TradFi side. And there is currently no really a liquid exchange between MiFID securities and crypto tokens. But this will come. As I hear, there are already players building on that. So basically combining a traditional securities exchange with a crypto exchange. And once we have that, I think, going into MiFID as safe haven could be a valuable option. We're not quite there yet, but as I hear, maybe next year. Yeah, and then the next one is leave the EU completely. Axel, now we're coming to your reverse solicitation obstacles for that. Right, so reverse solicitation, what is that? There is, actually in MiCAR, there is only a reverse solicitation exemption for crypto asset service providers. There is no similar rule for offerors. So that led actually to a lot of people always stating, well, reverse solicitation is only available for service providers, but not for token offerers. I think that's wrong. Where does this come from? The offeror section is basically copy and paste from the prospectus regulation. The prospectus regulation does not include any express reverse solicitation rule. The service provider section is basically copy and paste from MiFID. And there you find nearly the identical reverse solicitation exemption as now also in MiCAR. So that the fact that there is only an express reverse solicitation provision for service providers and none for offerors, I think has historical roots and was not meant to say that reverse solicitation is not available for offerors. So having said that, reverse solicitation means that the buyer of a crypto asset needs to go to the seller and approach the seller, right? So that is reverse solicitation. And that is typically fine, right? You can sell if you are approached by a European citizen from abroad, right? If you, as a non-EU issuer, are approached by an EU citizen, you are permitted to sell that EU citizen your token. But there is actually an ESMA consultation paper which got out, I think, in February this year, which tightens this rule to a very extreme extent, going way beyond what we know from the MiFID world. So it says that this rule under MiCAR is to be construed very limited and narrow. Solicitation includes, and that means you cannot claim being reverse solicited, but you have actively solicited, meaning you need to apply EU rules, right, white paper and so forth. When you have internet material available which can be accessed from within the EU, when you participate in trade fairs or international events and discussions. So it's not only actively advertising, but also speaking on conferences like this about your project, right? Which could be deemed, according to that consultation paper, already as active solicitation. And once you did that, you cannot accept any EU customers anymore, right? So basically, I don't really see how you will sell into the EU without crossing, that line that ESMA draw.
What if the person that is speaking is, let's say, associated with the GmbH that developed the thing, but the thing is actually being monetized under a license by another company from outside of the EU?
You're saying that you had been instructed with the German GmbH to code that token, and then, well, you can be a technical service provider, but obviously the line gets very thin when you then come up with a St. Lucia or Panama or BVI entity, which has no local directors, but basically you and your friends in the management board, then I think it will become difficult. So it depends, right? If it is a true third-party, unrelated instruction, yeah, of course, you can support them coding the stuff, right?
Do we have to apply to those rules of the entities?
Do we have to apply to those rules if the entity is based in the US, in Delaware, no active campaigns to EU clients, but you still have a residence in Germany? Do you have to?
You, in that case, the management or
the
company?
The owner, founder of that entity in the US, but staying here in Germany, my residence here, do I have to comply to those rules from the MiCAR?
You need to observe those rules in order to avoid to comply, right? For the time being, don't show up on conferences, talk about your US project, that will immediately bring it into the EU. Unfortunately, that's what we're seeing. But Delaware is also dangerous, right? So doing this out of the US, whoa, that's not easier than trying to do it here. So ultimately, I think this is too broad, and it will be interesting enough if the crypto community may come up with the idea to challenge this, because I, as a European citizen, actually have the right to choose my service providers or the seller of the goods that I want to buy, right? And this is overly restricting, I think, my constitutional right. So we'll see. Maybe somebody gets to the idea to actually challenge it ultimately. Enforcement. A lot of people say, well, the Europeans. I'm afraid of the SEC, but in Europe nothing happens. Not so sure if that will stay the same, because there are certain obligations to actually report what is going on. So we will have registers, obviously, for white papers, for issuers of art and EMT, and also for crypto asset service providers which act in the EU without having the proper authorization. specifically mentioned in violation of the reverse solicitation rules. Then, in addition to that, the competent authorities should publish on their websites any decision imposing administrative penalties or other administrative measures against anybody for a MiCAR infringement. So this is now naming and shaming at its best. And the interesting question is, as I also advise some countries on how to build up their regulation to be compliant with MiCAR, which national competent authority will actually be most active, right? They are currently all drowning in the tasks that they got due to MiCAR, and who is actually having the capacity to hunt the non-EU service providers and token issuers, right? So, and actually it's an immense dangerous game to only go for the European providers, which are easy to catch, and not to go against the outside of the EU providers, because if that is happening, our EU market is dead, right? It cannot compete.
Are there any discussions on harmonizing enforcement standards between the cross-border outside of EU and other countries?
Outside of the anti-money laundering stuff, I don't really see that happening, right? So that's an area where there is a very strong and close international collaboration. But the mere crypto regulation, I don't see that yet.
Or maybe create an extension to current anti-money laundering initiatives?
Yeah. No, the AML stuff is, again, a regulation on its own with, experts in that silo, and so yeah, I don't really see that happening. Yeah, but I think it's really important. So that's the question: who's going to push for that, and who's going to make it actually happen? Because there is no, or maybe I'm wrong. But I'm not aware of any EU-level competence for that. I think that's all left to the national competent authorities. And they can all say, well, why should I put effort in that? Should the other one do? So we'll see how that works out. All right, I think time is running out, right?
Roughly 5 minutes.
Roughly 5 minutes, okay. Good. There's another aspect. If you want to issue a token, you should check if you might also actually act as a crypto as a service provider. That happens fairly quickly when you start handling third-party tokens. For example, if there is maybe a not quite unhosted wallet involved in your game, or if you do any transfer services, if you provide for a not completely decentralized smart contract in which tokens are locked for any purpose, right? At that point in time, you potentially do not only sell tokens, but you also service them. And then you actually get into a complete different set of regulatory regime, because then you need an authorization. So that is something that needs to be checked fairly quickly. Why that? Because if you want to have the chance to be grandfathered by any means, then you actually need to do this in a completely compliant and legal manner until the end of this year, right? Otherwise, you need to file for a new authorization under MiCAR, and you need to basically stop your operation until you get that. Okay, so that's also another thing. Yeah. Conclusion. This is, I think, what any token issuer should assess rather quickly, right? What type of token do you actually issue? Do you want to be listed? And is a white paper required? At what point in time is your management prepared to take that risk of personal liability? I'm not yet aware of any D&O covering this, by the way, right? So we are talking to a number of insurances trying to get coverage. but that's really difficult right now. And then the question, is there any hidden crypto service built in what you are doing? You know, the only way to avoid that is that you achieve fully decentralization for any type of smart contracts that might deal with your customers' tokens, right? Otherwise, you need to be fronted for whatever service you want to offer. Yeah, that is my quick overview. Any questions?